Please put your hands together and give a big clap to Dr. Lily Sussman. Thank you, Lily. Over to you.
Thanks for that intro. You know, I was almost hoping they weren't going to change my name in the program and it'll be left as Anthony Nantes, because then I could make a funny joke about how many of you might be walking in and asking, could she be Anthony? Could she? I was like, I could. But a little bit less Australian, maybe a little bit less dry wit. I'd say equally sassy, and definitely equally passionate about what we're going to talk about today. So thanks for the intro. I am Lily. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Wiser, and I'm really, really happy to see all of you here because we're going to have a very fun chat together today. We're going to talk about impact. And I know you looked at the title of this talk and you said ESG, and you're like, oh yeah, ESG. Well, let's see if you still feel that way by the end of it. I'd love for this to be a bit conversational, so I'll talk, but please bring your questions. Let's have a robust discussion. So, before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. I know people are watching this broadcast from all over Australia, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd like to take a pause to reiterate our continuing support for the Uluru Statement from the Heart and our continuing support for the voice of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Great, so what are we talking about today? We're diving into ESG today. It's one of those topics that I'd say has gone from the fringes to the mainstream. The environmental, social, and governance standards of a company used to be something that we talked about kind of in the same breath as regulation or corporate social responsibility. But I would say nowadays it's actually much more mainstream and really it's just core to what we do as businesses. It is now synonymous with and is in fact commercial strategy. Now many of you in the room will be familiar with Larry Fink. Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock. And BlackRock, of course, is the world's largest asset manager. BlackRock manages 10 trillion USD of capital in the world. And Larry's been quite famous for going on the record and reiterating this in many places, saying that profits are in no way inconsistent with purpose. And in fact, profits and purpose are inextricably linked. Now that's quite an interesting comment because it's actually a 180 from what many of us were taught in business school, which is a Milton Friedman school of thought. Milton Friedman was a famous economist who said the job of any business is to focus first and foremost on profits. Milton Friedman's way of thinking was quite dominant in business for decades after shareholder capitalism was introduced in the 1950s, but things have been really changing under the radar, especially in recent years. Climate change, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, the importance of social movements like the ones that are very relevant right now, especially in the UK around the trans community, the growing prevalence of trends around mental health and human well-being, seeing the human as an ecological and a social animal, all of these huge global social trends have created brand new conversations in all of our lives and in the context of shareholder capitalism and in our businesses. We are now all talking about the circular economy. We're talking about decoupling growth from consumption. We're thinking about conserving the world's resources and habitats and biodiversity. We're questioning what is human and other species well-being? Do we even understand it? Why are we having such a mental health crisis in the world? And conscious capitalism, the idea that business can and should be fundamentally doing good, is an idea that's spreading like wildfire. It's on the rise. And capital, importantly, is following suit. Both investors and customers increasingly want to engage with and invest in and have a relationship with ethical brands, purpose-driven brands that are thinking deeply about human impact and not just profits. This has become table stakes for business. Now, ESG considerations, environmental, social, governance, standards, impact, it was something reasonably marginal, I would argue. But there's all this increasing robust evidence now that makes it clearer and clearer that long-term total shareholder return, or TSR, is actually best served by focusing on impact. And the research shows that purpose-led companies deliver twice as much long-term TSR. And companies that take ESG seriously, not as something they have to think about in addition to core business, but as the core business itself, those companies are attracting more capital and they're delivering greater returns. Now that's a curious puzzle, because we used to think about ESG more as a, do no harm. It's more of like a negative freedom. It was, in some cases, a regulatory tick-the-box exercise, mainly to ensure we didn't pollute in a big way or support substandard labor practices like modern slavery or corruption. But now all of this is changing. It's not just a don't do X, which is sort of a negative freedom, but now it's a do X. And X is about doing good. And research is showing that positive impact delivers greater returns. And investors are taking notice. And investment into companies that score higher on ESG has exponentially grown over the past decade. It's actually expected that by 2025, there's going to be 50 trillion USD invested into ESG-specific assets. And you can see a clear trend of year-on-year growth in investing into companies that are more robust and clear on their ESG impact. Now, we are no strangers to this in this room, I know, because our sector, the financial sector, we're more attentive to ESG strategy than most other industries in the ASX 200. So we already are, and that's not a surprise because we're investors ourselves. We're close to these trends, and we see where capital is going. We're close to it. And yet, what does ESG really mean to you? Like, could each of us stand up and say, yeah, I know exactly what this means to me and what this means to my business and what my business is doing about it? How do you actually put a value on it? How do you think about ESG in the context of your business, and how do we measure it? Well, the thing is, if you ever investigated this topic, or if you've never investigated it, either way, either you're deep in it or you're not deep in it at all, you'll see that it's kind of a complex thing, measuring ESG. Firstly, there's not one universal framework, because there's a number of fairly popular ones. And different companies and different investors will use different things. So we've got things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and Morgan Stanley Capital International's ESG ratings, which is very often used by fund managers. These are just a couple of the popular ones. Today, I'm going to spend some time making the argument that we have been getting a lot better on understanding and measuring and thinking clearly about E and G, which is environmental impact and governance impact and quality, but we have not made very much progress on S, which is social impact. Money managers and investors have paid closer attention to E, measuring climate change and carbon impact, sustainability of resources, impact on habitat agriculture, G, corruption, executive pay, board issues, things that we see a lot in the headlines. They've paid a lot of attention and put a lot of money towards those, but they have not put as much money or as much attention to S. When companies have attracted ESG earmark capital, investors have predominantly focused on looking at E and G criteria. And that means a lot less money has actually flowed to S than E and G. And why is that? Well, first of all, it's just easier. It's easier to measure E, for example. Environmental crisis, we know, has become a pressing issue for our generation, and we are, rightly so, developing better and better ways of measuring carbon footprint and emissions, looking at Scope 1, Scope 2, and 3 emissions, and ways of measuring that investigate the entire value chain of a company. Weiser was an early leader in FinTech in becoming a climate-positive organization, and we've been working hard to try to really robustly measure not just our direct activities from our offices and operations, but also of our suppliers and plus everything like corporate travel, as well as what our employees do while they work from home. And we've offset our emissions with pretty high quality projects aligned with the aims of the Paris Agreement. We've been working on deeper changes within the Wiser community ourselves, because the change needs to happen in us, right? And so we've been working on ourselves through green initiatives among our people, like clothing swaps, worm farms, eat one more vegetarian meal a week, ride your bike to work. Loads of small ideas, but just to raise awareness and to get people thinking about it. Not in a pushy way, because behavior change is not overnight, but in a way that we're trying to really grapple with it. And that's been easier, because it's well understood, this E thing. It's a lot easier than when we've tried to put our minds to the S. Michael Trail, who leads the Australian Government's Impact Investing Task Force, has pointed out that in the world of impact investing, a lot of good has been done, but the social element of ESG really has been missing in action. And what in the world is S anyways? Traditionally, we've focused on thinking about S as kind of a minimum set of standards around human labor practices, modern slavery and global supply chains, basic employee protections. But what about true social impact? What about the positive impact on human and societal well-being? There's an increasing trend everywhere around the world in the rise of purpose-led companies. I know there are a lot here among the FinTech community here in Australia. And there's an increase in number of B Corps and businesses that believe themselves to be ethical and forces for good. And if you're a business that's a force for good, you typically have a positive human purpose you want to achieve. Some kind of positive impact on your customers, some kind of positive impact on society that you're looking to unlock, that you're trying to build in the world. But how do you know? How do you know if you're a force for good? How do you conceive of and actually measure that positive impact? Like, how do you define S for your organization? Now let's look at the example of Morgan Stanley Capital International's ESG measurement framework, which is used by many institutional investors worldwide. It's a pretty robust measurement index. It rates companies from CCC to AAA with individual measures and scores for each of E, S, and G. The framework has a number of different ways that it uses to measure S, looking at human capital, labor standards, product liability, stakeholder opposition, and social opportunities. And this is all great, but a lot of it still has a strong vibe of do no harm, rather than the positive mandate of do positive good. And so today, I'm proposing that we here have an opportunity ahead of all of us. We have an opportunity to take that S that's missing in ESG and create something meaningful. We have an opportunity to better define and measure true social impact, which is impact on human well-being. An impact, positive impact on human well-being, it's something that's actually pivotal to the financial services sector. We're an increasingly ESG conscious sector, but we've historically tended to think about social impact as increasing access to financial services and capital, and increasing velocity and efficiency and liquidity of the financial system itself. The next frontier for our industry, for us, especially those of us who understand that purpose drives profits and are passionate about building the next generation of inspirational, successful, purpose-led businesses, the next frontier for us is moving beyond increasing access and inclusion to increasing impact. And I've just heard a talk in the last panel from Justin at Flux talking about the mission of Flux being to build the most financially well, responsible, empowered younger generation in Australian history, right? That's one way of thinking about impact, but how would we measure that? It's a great place to start. I think we have an opportunity to actually define the S in ESG as social human well-being and focus more intently and more deeply on this idea of what is well-being, what is financial wellness, what is financial health. We've all been warned with examples we've seen splashed all over global news. You all probably know the story of the young 20-year-old college student from Nebraska who was trading on Robinhood, the fintech in US, a consumer trading platform. It reached incredible scale very quickly, offering free trades. But it was dragged through the mud when a 20-year-old committed suicide because he was trading on the platform and he thought he had suffered a really big loss, and he didn't really understand it. And he hadn't actually suffered as big a loss, but he didn't realize that, and he thought he would be getting his family into trouble, and he took his own life. Now, that's just one example, and the Royal Commission has happened here. We all know about that, right? But putting the focus squarely on positive impact and human impact, and thinking much more sharply and deeply about the S in ESG, that is the invitation and the next frontier for our industry and for all of us here in this room. Because financial services is actually at the very bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, we are constantly, with our businesses, touching on the security layer for our customers, as well as, for many people, the flourishing layers of the hierarchy of needs. And so we should be paying attention to the S. We should be paying attention to human well-being and measuring and defining that better. Those of you who know us, you know that Wiser is a purpose-led company, and our purpose is financial wellness. And that means that we have the challenge of defining what that means. We literally have to exist for the S in ESG if we're a purpose-led company. So what is that? You know, it's not an easy thing. We have a financial wellness platform and unique credit products where we want to help people access credit if it's responsible and the right thing to do for them, but we also want them to be able to pay it back as quickly as possible, and we want to meet their financial and emotional needs along the way. So yes, we are a lender, but though we are a lender, our biggest loan category historically was debt consolidation to help people replace high interest rate debt with lower interest rate debt, with an end date, with a clear plan and path, and with as low interest rates as possible. And we encourage our customers to pay off their loans faster, and we've built proprietary tools and features that help them to do just that. Our data actually shows that 43, almost 50% of our customers pay early. They make early prepayments, and they're measurably paying off their debts faster. And we work really hard to really try to make sure, you know, we're just talking about in the last panel about responsible lending, to try to make sure that we do the hard work and ensure we don't lend to people who can't afford it, and we don't want to put anybody in financial stress. And we are trying to help even the playing field between lenders and borrowers by educating borrowers on how lending works and understanding where they are and what they need to do to improve, and how to improve their financial habits, how to improve their financial emotions, their financial well-being. And fundamentally, it's really about trying to recognize that everyone is deeply human, and therefore everyone's well-being is our business. And putting human well-being at the center of how you manage a business, you've got to recognize that well-being is this complex, holistic thing. You have to be authentic to have well-being. You have to have open emotional space in order for someone to feel like they can be themselves, for people to have their needs heard and met. And that means that it starts from the culture within Wiser and how we engineer our processes and the way we communicate with customers. And the way we treat our staff, that has to be the same way we treat our customers, because we're just all human if you put the human and the human well-being at the center of what you do. We've consistently won awards for being one of the best places to work in Australia because of this, and I'm very personally proud of Wiser this year being the national winner of AFR's Best Places to Work in Diversity and Inclusion in particular. And we try to bring that focus on everyone's deeper humanity and who they are underneath all the masking, and the holistic well-being to customer interactions, and as well as how we connect with each other and with employees at everything, whether it's town halls or just you know, at the water cooler or over Zoom. But we are far from perfect. We need to get better. We want to get better, especially at measuring and delivering on our core purpose, which is the S that's missing in ESG. You know, we're a climate-positive organization. We're actively engaging with our workforce to talk about the environment in an open, non-judgmental way that still helps us to get more educated, allows those of us who are passionate about it to share their passion with the rest of us. And we've been working on our governance and recently added more female representation. So now we've got 40% female board composition. But most of all, we have been working, and we need to put a lot more work into the S, because we really want to get better and better at measuring the social human impact that we're having, that our purpose-led model is having on our customers as well as employees. So last year we eliminated our gender pay gap, and we've been working hard on diversity inclusion, and particularly in building EQ and paying attention to this notion of holistic well-being. And we know that customers who engage with our financial wellness-focused tools, they don't just come and get a loan with us. They come to us, they want to improve their lives. They want to feel less stressed out. They have life goals they want to achieve. And what we can do is help them with that in one way or the other, whether it's giving them credit if it's the right thing for them or not, or helping them pay off their loans faster, improving their credit worthiness, learning what they need to know, being talked to like a human. But we want so much more. Our challenge, and I think all of our challenges, is to redefine what deeper financial wellness really is. What does our sector really exist to do? We need to set and continue to set a high bar for defining this, measuring, and holding ourselves to account to achieve it. We need to be very clear. What does S mean? How are you going to measure it? How are you going to prove it? And so there's a lot more work to be done in the coming year and years. Wiser's been winning a lot of awards alongside many of you here today. But it's not time to rest on our laurels. Our sector is challenged right now. Tech stocks have dived, there's been dramatic rises in the cost of capital and the cost of living, a host of difficult challenges from uncertain macroeconomic conditions. In a bear market, and when things are uncertain, it is that much more important to recommit to what you stand for and recommit to making a positive human impact, putting that front and center of what problem your business exists to solve. So today, I want to raise a call to action here at Intersekt. We've seen that while ESG has become more valuable and attracted a lot more institutional investor capital from around the world, we've gotten more and more robust at measuring and delivering on E and G, we haven't really thought enough about S. It hasn't attracted as much capital, it's not as well defined. There's so much room for innovation. That's what that means. Innovation that's going to attract capital and that's going to make a difference in the world. So we can sit around and we can wait for regulators to tell us what the S in ESG is, which they will, I'm sure of it. They have in the US and UK and Europe, and Aussie regulators are catching up. But we don't have to do that. We should be setting the bar ourselves. We should be leading. We should be the visionaries that redefine what financial services can be creating in the world. And beyond provision of financial rails and enabling liquidity and access to capital, which we've done, what if we focused more on the S and we focused more on deep human and societal well-being? What does that look like? What new business models and creative new ideas would we come up with if we set that as a central challenge for ourselves? I know that Wiser has a ton of room for innovation and for pushing the envelope further. And I know that so many of you in this room are inspirational leaders and you want to make a positive difference. Everyone wants to make a positive difference with our time, with our energy, the time that we spend at work. So let us do that together. Let us take the missing S and let's make it incredible. Let's make it deeper. Let's make it robust. Let's attract the growing capital that's available to us. Let's make big things happen by redefining that. And let's make the world a better place, putting ESG and especially S at the center of what we're thinking about and what we're solving for with innovation. My hope is that I'm going to see more of you next year standing up here and sharing back your stories of how you've pivoted your business or better defined it and created new ESG impact and how you're measuring it and how you're thinking about it and you're leading the path forward and paving the way for the future generation of innovators. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing with me and the fact that I am not Anthony. He would have loved to be here today, but he had a family emergency. But thanks so much for showing up, and I'm going to take questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Dr. Lily Sussman. Lily, I'm going to kick off with one. I've been around the Oval a few times, and 20 plus years ago we used to talk about triple bottom line, trying to do the right thing in business. Kind of fell by the wayside. ESG feels a little bit like that. But my question is a generational one, because I've found this fascinating. As I talk to founders in the FinTech and many other startup spaces, that sense of purpose, that social aspect, having a social license around what you do and operating in your community and with your business, is this really strong ethic in the new next generations that are coming. And to me, that means that if you don't get that as a business, they're going to cut you from their list. Do you have that sense as you look around and let's say the millennials and underneath are the people who are making these decisions about how they spend their money, who they spend it with, by the social license that a company has?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I made the point first and foremost that even if you're a bottom line kind of person, the evidence is very clear that purpose is going to better drive your bottom line. That's just what the evidence says. And that makes a lot of sense because you've created a win-win business model and you're very, very close to what your customers want. But the point you're making is that customers want really great businesses that help them with their human well-being. Of course they do. So, I mean, it's not just a millennial thing, it's a human thing. Right? Like maybe we're willing to put up with a business that we're very unclear about if they're doing good or not, if they're really helping me or not. But, I mean, that's only if you're not putting it side by side with a business that's so obviously helping to improve human beings. Once those are side by side, that competition comes in, you know who's going to win. So I think it's both. I don't think there is a trade-off anymore. There's no trade-off. There is a clear path forward. But we've got to just go there, right? We've got to say, okay, what's my business for? I'm going to define the S.
Anyone here questions? Anyone want to define the S? Daniel.
Hi, Lily. I run a B2B business, and I'm really curious as to your thoughts on how you do the S in that context where you're not touching the consumer directly.
B2B is like B2B2C in a way, right? Because at the end of the day, all business exists to serve humans. That's what it exists for at the end of the day. Somebody down the supply chain, somewhere in the value chain, is buying it. So, I mean, how do you even have a conversation about social impact? What are you talking about when we're talking about human well-being? Right? It sounds like very fluffy, just like the environment used to be very fluffy. Like, what is it? Until we got more robust about it and really said, look, let's define it this way, let's think about it this way, we're going to segment it this way. Same thing with S, and that's through conversation. As a B2B business, you have so much opportunity to shape the conversation with whoever is buying your product, right? And ultimately, they're only going to buy your product if it's helping them with their product and their customers. So there's 100% a connection. I think we're all capable of going out there and thinking, what S do I stand for? What do I want to see? What would S mean for me? How am I going to talk about my business like it's an ESG business and I'm going to exist to serve one of these impacts? I don't know if that answered your question.